Alright, this is the real story of the Undead Army by Mr. Ballin. I like Mr. Ballin. He's a really good storyteller.
If there is one war story that everybody needs to hear at least once, it is the crazy story of how this small group of Russian soldiers during World War I defended Auschwitz Fortress in Poland. It is both absolutely horrific and utterly inspiring.
You watch
And I
him whenever you
guarantee
have your
it's
brunch
nothing
sick.
like any other war story you've ever heard. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because
This
that's
seems
all we
interesting.
do, and we upload once a week. So,
World
if
War
that's of
I
interest to you,
story.
please sneak into the like button's house, take all their fresh eggs out of the fridge, hard boil them, and then put them back. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story.
Foreign music. Last Stand.
On the morning of August 3rd, 1915,
You've heard of
during
this
World
one
War
before?
I, a
I have
21-year-old
not.
Russian soldier named Vladimir Kotlinski looked out from behind the huge stone walls of Auschwitz Fortress in Poland. Out in front of him, he saw the same landscape he had been looking at for the last 6 months that he had been stationed at this fortress. It was a big, swampy forest that surrounded them on all sides. Additionally, in this swampy forest around them on all sides were dozens and dozens of trenches. Trenches are long, deep pits that soldiers will dig to both hide inside of when they're being attacked, and then also
Yeah.
to launch their own attacks out of from behind their dirt walls.
Also
And
to move
these
supplies.
trenches that zigged and zagged all around Auschwitz Fortress were created by and now occupied by 7,000 German soldiers. And during World War I, the Russians were fighting the Germans. The Germans really wanted to take Auschwitz Fortress from the Russians.
The Germans were
It was in
war
a
crazy,
great
weren't
strategic
they?
Position with a railway
In the
passing
old
right
days.
through it. There was also a river nearby and a main road, meaning whoever owned this fortress was greatly aided in moving critical wartime supplies and troops in a very hotly contested area. But despite the repeated attempts by these 7,000 Germans to take over Auschwitz Fortress over the past 6 months, they had all been repelled by Vladimir and the puny 900-man Russian force inside of the fortress.
That's
and
a
so
fortress.
By that morning, August 3rd,
It's the power of a
1915,
fortress.
as Vladimir is looking out from the battlements over the trenches in the marsh down below, it was like both the Russians and the Germans had reached a sort of stalemate, where neither side was planning to attack the other.
They were both tired.
And neither side was leaving. They were just kind of staying put and doing nothing. In fact, over the last few weeks, there had been so little action from either side that the Russian soldiers inside the fortress got so bored, they began sneaking out the side door of the fortress to try to catch fish with their bare hands in the nearby river. But this morning, as Vladimir stood atop the wall, he noticed something strange happening in one of the trenches that was located closest to the fortress. It was
Mongoose.
still several hundred feet away, but he could see clearly down into this trench.
And he
what
didn't get
saw
shot.
was there was this cluster of high-ranking German officers that were kind of huddled together, and they kept looking down at the ground at something inside of the trench that Vladimir couldn't see, and then they would look up at the sky and kind of wave their hands around, and then they'd look back down at the ground below them. Now, Vladimir had no idea what they were doing. I mean, again, he could not see what they were looking at in the trench, and when he looked up into the sky where they seemed to be looking, it just looked like a regular blue sky. But whatever they were doing, it was making Vladimir feel nervous.
They were scheming.
Vladimir was a young junior officer, which meant he was in charge of other soldiers, but because he was so new, he lacked experience and credibility,
They're
and so
scheming.
really wasn't considered a serious leader within the army. And so Vladimir, as he's watching this strange behavior, was concerned that if he left now and told his superiors that he was worried about the Germans because they were looking at the sky funny,
How
looking
dare
the
they
ground
look at the
funny,
sky?
that it would make him look like he was being paranoid and not a good leader.
Brother,
And so
they're
ultimately,
looking at the
Vladimir
sky.
just looked at this cluster inside of the trench and decided, you know what, they're not shooting at us, there's no attack happening, so whatever they're doing, it can't be that big of a deal, and lately,
They
no one's
must
done
be
anything,
planning
so why would that
something.
change now? And so Vladimir left the walls of Auschwitz Fortress and went down below to hang out with his friends. 3 days later, at 4 in the morning, the
Did I do
Russian
good?
soldiers
Was that
who
good?
were up along the Osevich fortress walls keeping watch that night noticed something strange out in the darkness near where the Germans were. When they looked out, they saw that the dark night air almost looked kind of
The dark
blurry
night.
or wavy, kind of like if you were looking at air coming off of hot
Oh, it's
pavement
hot.
on a sunny day, it would look kind of blurry. That's what the night sky looked like to them.
There's a
But
heat
of course,
wave.
it couldn't be because of heat and sun, because it's the morning, it's cold, it's dark outside. And so as these Russians are looking out, not sure what to make of
Chemicals.
this blurry air, they began calling up more Russians to go have a look and figure out what this was. And over
Brother,
the next
come
couple
look
of minutes,
this.
as the Russians looked out from behind the walls
Chemicals.
at this air, they realized what it was. It was this huge grayish-green cloud that was as wide as the fortress was, and the wind was blowing it in their direction.
What
Now,
the
Russian
fuck?
soldiers had no idea what this was, and so they just kind of stood there watching it in stunned silence. And as they watched,
I wouldn't know what to
they
do
saw
either.
as the cloud would touch any vegetation, like leaves on trees or the high grass in the marsh, it would all turn black and shrivel up. And then the soldiers began hearing
It's a
soft
blight.
thump, 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 thump out in the darkness, and it was the sound of birds dying and falling to the
What the
ground.
fuck?
that were
Chemical
inside of this
warfare.
cloud. At this point,
In World
the
War
Russians
I, oh,
began to
yeah.
panic, and they began to run to sound the alarm to get the other soldiers up to prepare for an attack. But as they did, they began to smell this very harsh chemical smell coming into the fortress.
That's why they made
And
rules
then
about
before
chemical
long,
warfare.
All the Russians could hear was the sound of their comrades coughing. It would turn out that strange behavior that Vladimir saw 3 days earlier of the German officers huddled together looking at the sky and then looking down
They
at the
were
ground
judging
and
the
back at
wind.
the sky again. What they were doing was preparing for a chemical attack on Osevich Fortress. On the ground, out of sight of Vladimir, were canisters containing the poisonous gas, and when the officers would look up and put their hands up, they were gauging if the wind was strong enough and in the right direction to launch the attack.
I knew.
Now, 3 days ago, the wind had not been in their favor, but this morning at 4 a.m. on August 6th, 1915, the wind had been in their favor, and they had
collected
released
all
gas.
the farts.
And this gas was quite possibly the worst gas you could ever come up against on the battlefield.
It's
It
all
was
the
a
farts.
combination of chlorine gas and bromine gas. On their own, chlorine and bromine are very toxic and can kill you. But when you mix those two gases
If chlorine can kill you, why is it in swimming pools? Why do people put chlorine in swimming pools if it can kill you? If you swim in swimming pools, are you killing yourself? Chemists, please, please, I need answers. I'm an artist. I don't know this shit.
it becomes exponentially more dangerous. The gas mixture binds to moisture and then turns the moisture into hydrochloric acid, meaning if a person who did not have a gas mask on came in contact with this poisonous gas, when they inhaled it, it would literally fill their lungs with acid.
Bro, it's just the battle royale ring coming in. It's because it's the final ring, so the gas is coming in. It's all it is. Because the game's about to end. You're a nurse and you don't know that shit. God moment. Facts. Isn't it? It's real.
Which would dissolve them from the inside out. And then also, the gas would get into
Warzone
their eyes
things.
and into their nose, and the acid there would burrow holes into their skull. And once
What
you
the
come in
fuck?
contact
It's
with
acid?
this gas,
It's
there's
gassed?
nothing anybody can do to save you.
I just made the word. It's gassed. It's acidic gas, so it's gassed.
You're gonna die, except it's gonna take a really, really long time. You don't just immediately dissolve. It's this long, drawn-out, excruciatingly
Bro.
painful process. By this point,
You
in
just
World War
melt.
I, chemical warfare was really not being used by anybody, and so as a result, the Russian army did not outfit their soldiers with gas masks.
They didn't know
The
about
German
it.
army did, and they knew the Russian army did not. So, as this horrific poisonous gas began permeating every square inch of Auschwitz Fortress, all of these Russian soldiers had nothing they could do to protect themselves from this gas. And so right away, soldiers began bleeding from their eyes and their mouths and their ears, and they literally began coughing up chunks of their lung. And so very quickly, the Russians inside the fortress
Chemical warfare is the
understood
worst.
they were being poisoned. And so these
It's
soldiers
the most
that were
inhumane
not as
shit.
affected, at least not right away, by this gas, quickly began ripping off their shirts, dunking them in water, and wrapping them around their heads to try to limit how much they breathed in of this chemical. But it really didn't do much to stop the chemical. In fact, these makeshift gas masks might have made it worse because the gas would
stick.
bound to the moisture
Yeah,
on
it
the
would
shirt.
stick
And
to
so
the shirt.
the Russians were totally doomed.
So you just
They
breathe
were
it forever.
surrounded on all sides outside the walls by their enemy, and then inside the fortress was this gas, and there was no ventilation in the fortress, and so there was nowhere to go. They couldn't escape death no matter where they went. And so Vladimir, he was one of the guys that was still on his feet inside of the fortress, and he stumbled over to this narrow window on the side of the fortress walls, and he looked out and he saw all these Germans running towards them, firing their machine guns, artillery's being fired. I mean, he knows they are moments away from the Germans reaching the fortress door, coming inside, and killing every last one
Bro,
of
just
them.
shoot yourself in the head at that
Vladimir's
point.
reaction to this was not being scared or being sad. Instead, he suddenly felt incredibly motivated. If they're going to come in here and kill us, then
We
we're
kill
gonna
them
make it
too.
as hard as humanly possible first. Vladimir
Okay.
had a reputation for being totally fearless. Over the past 6 months that they had been under siege from the German
Vladimir.
army out in their trenches, anytime fighting broke out, Vladimir was always the first to run up and be right on the front line of fighting. And then several times when his comrades had been shot or wounded, Vladimir would run out into the line of fire to save the fallen soldiers. It was like Vladimir lacked any instinct for self-preservation.
That dude
And
could
so
tap
as the
strafe, I
Germans
bet, because he
continued
couldn't
their
get
run
hit.
towards the fortress, artillery shells are hitting the walls, there's constant gunfire, and Vladimir, he leaves his window and he marches back over to the open courtyard inside of this fortress where the 100 or so other still living Russian soldiers were. I mean, they're all gonna die. They've been totally poisoned by this gas, and it's just a matter of time now. But they're still on their feet, and Vladimir walks over to them, and even though again
He got
he's
the
pretty
movement.
junior,
He got the
stands up and he
schmovement.
says to them, "This is our moment. We are all going to die. But what we do right now will define us." And the way Vladimir said it, he got those 100
He's
soldiers who were on
illustrating.
death's door to be so motivated so quickly that they rallied to him. And so as these men are literally bleeding out of their eyes, their mouths, they're coughing up pieces of their lung, Vladimir explained the plan. And then moments later, with Vladimir in the front, this gaggle of soon-to-die Russian soldiers,
The fact that they can
charged
still
towards the gates, opened the fortress, and
operate.
began running out towards the Germans, screaming with their bayonets lowered. Now, the Germans on the outside fully expected that this chemical attack would kill all of the Russians, that taking Auschwitz Fortress would be super routine because when they walked in, everybody would be dead. And so suddenly to have the fortress open and have these men that are covered in bloody rags and they're puking up pieces of their organs and they're stumbling forward like zombies with bayonets out, screaming like banshees, it scared the living out of the Germans. In fact,
I'd get
they were
scared
so
too.
quickly terrified by what they saw, they literally dropped their guns, turned, and began running back towards their trenches. And as they did, Vladimir and his dead man army began picking off the Germans one by one. And then after Vladimir and the dead man army ran out of ammunition, they just continued staggering forward directly into the thousands of Germans in front of them and began picking up dead German weapons and firing them. And then when they
Holy.
got up to the
Giga
trenches,
Chad.
where these retreating Germans had been so scared they had run into their own barbed wire, and so there's all these retreating Germans
They
stuck
ran
on the
into their own
wire.
barbed
The Russians
wire.
just began bayoneting all these men that were stuck. And so at some point, as Vladimir is
What?
doing this, a German soldier ran up to him and bayoneted Vladimir right in the stomach. He ran him all the way through until the barrel of the gun was right up against his stomach. And Vladimir apparently looked down at this bayonet, knew he had been completely run through, and he looked up at the German who had just stabbed him, who's still holding the gun, and Vladimir spit blood and lung tissue all over this German's face, and then just began screaming directly at this guy. And so the German was so scared, he just dropped the gun, turned, tried to run, and then Vladimir was back on his gun with the bayonet still in his stomach, shooting at the Germans.
Holy.
The Germans were so completely caught off
Bro,
guard
they were built
and
different
terrified
back in the day.
Vladimir's dead man army counterattack that even though they outnumbered the Russians 70-1, they failed to take Auschwitz Fortress. The main reason for that was the Germans who had escaped the counterattack and made it back to their trenches. They told the other German soldiers that the
So they
Russians
ran
had
as
turned
well?
into zombies, literally, that they were undead, and so attacking them was pointless. They're already dead. And the
God,
Germans
zombies.
were so scared they refused to leave their trenches again. Once the Russians could tell they had successfully forced a retreat by the German army, Vladimir, who was still alive at this point with a gun still stuck
How
in
are
his
you
gut
still
from the
alive at this
bayonet,
point?
he called out to the rest of his soldiers to retreat back to the fortress. And so this handful of Russian soldiers who were about to die, they hobbled their way back inside of their fortress, and then Vladimir gave his final command: destroy the fortress.
It's
If we
called
can't have
zombies.
it, nobody can. Every single Russian soldier that came in contact with that poisonous gas died, including Vladimir. When the Germans did eventually take Auschwitz Fortress at a later date, when again all of the Russians were dead, when the Germans went inside, they realized the fortress had been destroyed and it was no longer strategically valuable. Vladimir would be awarded posthumously Russia's highest military honor. His actions and the actions of the other dying soldiers that fought alongside him are remembered today
That's crazy.
in stories, songs, and statues all across Russia.
Bro, people back then were built different. It's crazy.
$250,000. That's how much you all contributed to Dave Hartsock's GoFundMe page after we covered his story on our YouTube channel. Dave
Wow.
is the heroic skydiver who sacrificed his body to save his student. Now, because of that, Dave is totally paralyzed and fully dependent on his mother to take care of him.
Giga Chad,
I spoke
dude.
to Dave after all this
Man,
money
stop
came in,
strafing.
and to say he's happy is such an understatement. I mean, this literally changed his life, and it's because of you. But as awesome as that is, our work is
He
not
got
done.
that
There are other very deserving
Newcastle
people that really
passive
could use
too,
our help.
reviving
And
his
one
teammate.
group in particular that really needs attention are the victims of violent crime as well as their families. And that is where the Mr. Ballin Foundation comes into play. Within days of the Uvalde Elementary
Top
School
one Fred, at
shooting,
that point,
the Mr.
yeah.
Ballin Foundation sent $150,000 to support
The most
victims
giga
and
of
their
all
families.
Chads.
And going forward, we will continue to support them as long as they need support. This year, in addition to all the donations
Man
we
was
expect
still
to receive,
able to
our
blow up
company,
the-
Ballin Studios, which is a separate entity,
the
is
fortress,
going to be giving $1 million
dying
to the Mr.
from
Ballin Foundation, and
poison,
all of it will go to the cause. We are
dying
not
from
taking
stab
any money
wound-
for
from a
profit
stab
in
wound.
Mr. Ballin Foundation. Truly, 100%
And struggling.
of donations that go into that foundation go to the cause. And if you don't
How?
know this, that is very rare for most charities. Usually, you got to pull money to pay for the organization. Not for us. It is 100%. You give money to the Mr. Ballin Foundation, it goes right out the door to victims of violent crime and their families. So, if you want to join forces with me and the Mr. Ballin Foundation and genuinely
That's a very
make
good foundation.
difference in the lives of people that so desperately need our help, go to MrBallin.Foundation and click on Get Involved at the top of the page. Once there, consider becoming a monthly donor to the
I like this
Honor
that
Them
the
Society.
ad
These supporters
he is
not only contribute
promoting
to the
is
cause,
his
but
own
also
thing.
they get free gifts and exclusive invites to special live events. Again, go to MrBallin.Foundation and click on Get Involved to see how you can partner up with me and the Mr. Ballin Foundation.
Sick. Wait, there's more.
So that's gonna do it. If you got something out of today's episode,
You're naming your
and
new
you haven't
golden
done this already,
retriever
please
Vlad,
sneak in
Sam
to the
and
like button's
Vlad.
house and remove all
Wait.
of their fresh eggs from their fridge.
You have a new one?
Boil them and then put them back. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. We have a podcast called the Mr. Ballin Podcast that puts out brand new podcast exclusive stories on Monday mornings, and on Thursday mornings we upload the remastered
Planning
audio
to buy
of
a
our
new
best
one.
YouTube
Holy.
videos. Again, the podcast is just called the Mr. Ballin Podcast,
Good
and it's
luck
available
on
exclusively on
good
Amazon
luck
Music.
with your
Consider donating to our
furniture.
charity. It's called the Mr. Ballin Foundation, and it provides support to victims of violent crime as well as their families. Monthly donors to the Mr. Ballin Foundation Honor Them Society will receive free gifts and exclusive invites to special live events. Go to mrballin.foundation and click on Get Involved to join the Honor Them Society today. We have two
Sam's a
additional
good
YouTube
boy.
channels, Mr.
Yeah, but
Ballin Shorts and Mr. Ballin
if you get
en
a puppy,
Espanol. We also put out near daily content on TikTok, Facebook, and Snapchat. All of
puppies
those channels
just
are just
munch
called
on
Mr.
everything.
Ballin. If you want to get in touch with me, please follow me on any major social media platform and then send me a direct message. My username is just @Mr. Ballin, and I really do read the majority of my DMs. To check out our merch, to join our Discord server, or just see what things are going on within our studio,
Sick.
go to our brand new website, ballinstudios.com. So, whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, other YouTube channels, the podcast, wherever, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.
Thanks, Mr. Ballin. That was a good story. I didn't know about that. That was sick though. Giga Chad Vladimir. My football teammates used to call me Vladimir. I forgot why. Oh, it was because there was a time when I played like how a Russian player played and they started calling me Vladimir.